morning, everybody. Welcome back to the West Coast Davengers, or welcome for the first time. I'm your host, Dave, the caffeinated man, full of comics, laughs, and sarcasm. But today, we're going to be serious for a moment. Just for a moment, as I'm going to teach you how to collect comics. Now, I know that sounds stupid. It's not actually teaching. I'm just going to kind of explain to you some of the ways that I collect and some of the ways that maybe will be helpful for you going forward if you are a new collector or somebody that's looking to just kind of focus in on collecting something, but they have too much stuff or they're trying to figure it out. So I want to help if I can. But first, every Wednesday is West Coast Wednesday, my comic claim sale where you can buy comics from me right here on this YouTube channel. Usually starts around 7 p.m. Pacific, 10 p.m. Eastern, and wherever else you are in the world, some other time. I also have a podcast with my buddy Manu, the 9.9 Newsstand. It's called It Came from the Newsstand. It's a podcast that two sellers who are collectors, that's me and Manu, we get together and we kind of just wax nostalgic and talk about experiences we have as sellers and books that we found. You can find the link tree down below in the description where you can find the podcast on any platform. It's called It Came from the Newsstand. So recently I watched another YouTuber's kind of how to collect comics video, and I was kind of disappointed by the lack of actual in-depth information and the imagination that was not put into that video. And I find myself to be somebody that understands the collecting mentality a lot. I've been collecting different things my whole life. I'm 43. Records, toys, comics, autographs, you name it. I've collected it, and I've spent a lot of time in the industry selling them as well. I worked in the sports memorabilia industry for 12, 15 years. And so I know what it's like to have a large collection of sports memorabilia, whether it's autographs or game-used equipment. Now, there's one phrase that kind of irks me. It's collect what you like. Right? And for the new collector, that means absolutely nothing. That's like saying the sky is blue. Well, yeah, of course, collect what you like, but I'm trying to get started. I don't know what I like because I don't have experience. As a young kid, I didn't know what I liked until I found this comic, until I got Wolverine #1 and I realized this is who I like and this is what I wanted. And that was my gateway drug, was Wolverine, the 1988 series. I had never even read the Frank Miller, Chris Claremont series. The one that I do enjoy, I think is a correct way of saying it, is there's no wrong way of collecting, which is true, because I'm going to show you several things that I collected, several different sub collections that I have and the things that I enjoy that bring me joy. So obviously you want to get to the place where you collect what you like, but first you have to really know the ins and outs of what's available and what you actually like. If you're a 20-something-year-old or you're a 13-year-old and somehow you're watching this video and you're like, what the fuck is this old geezer talking about? Plus, I just said fuck and I'm talking about 13-year-olds and that's bad language. Don't listen to me, kids. Except listen to me. As I started collecting as a kid, like I said, Wolverine was my gateway drug, and then my gateway drug into art was this man right here, Todd McFarlane. As you know, on this channel, I have words that I live by, see Todd, buy Todd, and I do advise everybody that's into comics, pick up something that McFarlane's done. It might change your world, and it might really get you in love with a certain type of art. Generally, we're drawn to characters, right? We're drawn to characters that we can identify with. And so if you're just looking for something that you're trying to identify with, I think the best place to start with comic collecting, and let me say this, as much as I am a voracious comic reader, and I am one of those people that does not like to waste parts of the animal, I don't just collect for investment, I don't just collect for art, and I don't just collect to read. All of it. It's all of it. So to me, if I was going to say the right way to collect is not to waste parts of the animal. But I'm not representative of everybody, and everybody is not representative of me. We're all different people. Right. So let's get that out of the way first. You shouldn't let other people tell you what to collect. And I'm not telling you what to collect. I'm showing you how I collect and that ways to get started and where you can go from there. But I'm not saying you have to do any of this. There are people out there that will make you think you need to own something. Generally, I'd stay the fuck away from those people. Because if they're telling you, whoa, you have to have this, this is worth money, it's usually a sign that it's not. As you see here, I've got some of my favorite things. I couldn't pull out everything. I don't want to show you my entire collection because that would take hours. That would be a 14-part documentary series about Dave's collection. But I brought out some of the things that mean the most to me. As a kid in the 90s, I was collecting some things that I really truly loved and I read. But I fell prey to the speculation boom as a young kid. The death of Superman, the breaking of the Bat, the Clone Saga, all this shit that was garbage or is trying to get me to buy things in multiples that I shouldn't be buying. And then that gave way and the comic market crashed and comic books kind of hit a low and I grew up a little bit. It was this book right here that this is one of the couple of books that got me back into it. And I will suggest this: if you are looking to get into comics, start reading comics first, because reading will be the way to get you in to loving comics. And then from there, you're going to discover the things that you truly love about comics, whether it's more art heavy, whether it's more storytelling, whether it's people that do both very well. And case in point would be Sin City. I read Frank Miller's Sin City probably when I was 22, maybe 23. It changed my life. Wait, this guy can write and draw and do both like perfectly. And I hadn't read any of his Daredevil yet, so I wasn't really well versed in that. But Sin City was my gateway drug to a writer artist, whereas and Dark Knight Returns, I read year one, even though Mazzucchelli did the art on that, and then 300 as well. I can't forget about 300. But Sandman was the book that made me fall in love with comics as a storytelling medium. It rocked my world. Watchmen soon came after, Mouse. So a lot of these kind of masterpiece works from these, Neil Gaiman, this is his comic masterpiece, the 75 issues. I started collecting hardcovers and graphic novels and getting full runs. I fell in love with the Batman Dracula series from Kelly Jones and Doug Munch. It's Red Rain, Bloodstorm, and Crimson Mist. Now these are huge parts of my collection. They're first edition hardcovers. I've read this over and over and over. So this is something that I would say is one of my favorite things in my collection. And, that's where you start. You start by reading and getting into it. But then there's the other, and we'll talk about him even more. And he's somebody, like I said, I talk about a lot. Todd McFarlane is my favorite artist. And without his art, I would not have an overall appreciation for art. Now, this book's long out of print, so if you're going to buy it, it's going to be a little expensive in a hardcover, but you can still get it in a softcover form. But this is a great gateway drug to knowing what he's done in his artwork in the comics that exist, that you can start collecting. And I implore you, if you do see somebody's art and they have a book of their art that's not even their comics, but just their art of the comics, pick it up. You will learn so much. This is the McFarlane Tome. You can learn everything about every piece of art he ever created in the first, I think this covers about the first 25 years of his career. Then you can go out and buy those books. You can buy them in whatever grade copies you want. They can be for you to hold and just admire, or you can buy them to read. That's another way to kind of get started. Now look, if you're really starting at the bottom and you're like, I've never read a comic book in my life, where do I start? I would say, what kind of stories interest you? If you say, I really want to read just a general superhero story, well, you can start with something like this. One of the greatest superhero crossover stories of all time. This is Infinity Gauntlet from Marvel. And you're probably very familiar, if you've seen a Marvel movie, of the characters in here and kind of the basis of the story. Comic book's a little bit different. It's actually a love story, Thanos courting death. And then you get exposed to a couple of different artists. You get exposed to Jim Starlin, George Perez, and Ron Lim. And a ton of characters. So if you pick up something like this, or let's say Kingdom Come by Alex Ross and Mark Waid, or Marvels by Kurt Busiek and Alex Ross, if you pick up something like that, then you get a little more exposure to the characters, some writers, artists. It's all about trying some things. I'm a big music fan, a record collector, but a huge music fan. And the way that I expanded my music palette was, as a kid, I was listening to the radio, and in the 90s, Nirvana and Pearl Jam and Soundgarden, Alice in Chains, Metallica, all these bands that I was listening to regularly. As I got a little bit older, I started to go back and see the bands that influenced them. And then I started listening to those bands. I remember the first time I'd really listened to The Who, which is a huge influence on Pearl Jam. And I was like, oh my God, this band is amazing. When you figure out the things that you like and you go back and see what influenced them, and you go back and see who you just keep going back in the influences, the things that you enjoy will expand, and the things that you look for will expand. Another piece of it is who's your favorite character. So let's say you end up saying, okay, I want to read a Spider-Man story. Well, there's plenty of Spider-Man stories out there. For me, Wolverine was always my favorite character until I really kind of got into Batman. And this is one of the greatest Wolverine stories ever told, Weapon X. And the thing is you can read this in a trade paperback, you can get it in a collected, or you can buy the single issues. It's 12 issues. Plus, that'll give you, if you want to read it in single issue format, there's 3 backup stories in every issue of Marvel Comics Presents. But that's another way to discover more, is just by reading more. For investment purposes, we'll talk about the CGC aspect, and I will cover that. Even though it's not how I collect, I'm not an idiot. I know how things work, okay? So let's say you're not into the superhero genre, and you want to explore something more mature. Then you can just Google greatest comic writers ever, and you will find a list that will include Alan Moore. It will include Neil Gaiman. It'll probably include Denny O'Neil. It'll include Frank Miller. If you're more into the story and the art is just kind of like it's a consequence of reading a comic book, then it won't really bother you. You will find amazing art. Dave Gibbons was the illustrator for Watchmen. He's a fantastic artist. And you'll learn more by just looking at his art than you probably would spending time in certain museums. There's the way to start getting into comics is also the way to start collecting comics. Those two things are synonymous. You don't have to collect for money. You can just collect to collect, because collecting is part of the human experience. We're all collectors of something. If you're more into like the anti-establishment, then underground comics might be for you. Some R. Crumb, some Robert Williams, the whole Fantagraphics label. If you want to read something that is considered one of the greatest comic books of all time, you've got Love and Rockets, and then you can collect it, because actually it's a pretty tough collection to put together, and it's not cheap. Finding first print Love and Rockets #1, or even the first couple issues. If you're just looking for one-off stories and you want to start collecting from there, then Image Comics might be the way to go. It's just God Country's a perfect example of a great story, and here's my experience with God Country. Somebody told me I should read it. I bought the trade paperback. I read and then I was like, I really want to own these single issues from a collecting standpoint. And so I tracked down each of the 6 single issues in first printing. I even got some of the second printings and third printings, just because for me, when I collect something, I'm a completist. That's just my personality. I can't start something and not see it through. That just weighs too heavy on my mind. So that is my collecting experience. That doesn't have to be yours. You can just pick up the first issue and get it. I just wanted to have them all. And that's the other thing. Like, our personalities are tied to our collecting habits. There's no way around that. And that's a beautiful thing about collecting, is that it shows your personality in certain ways. I talk about it on this channel all the time, that when I buy a collection, I see the person's personality that I'm going through the collection. It may sound morbid, but I bought a lot of people's collections that have passed on, and I can see how they collected. It gives me an insight to who they are. And so that's another brilliant thing. It's a very personal thing. So that's why people say there's no wrong way to collect, because there's no wrong way to exist as a human in your personality when it comes to this. And so it's a very personal thing, but and once again, I'm not telling you how, I'm just giving you a little insight. I've been doing this a long time, and I've seen a lot of things, and I've bought a lot of collections, and a lot of my friends collect, and I know their personalities because I sell to a lot of them. One last thing I'll talk about is like hardcovers, these giant oversized hardcovers. Here's the Carl Barks Uncle Scrooge. Now, this is the difference between certain people, right? There are people that want to own this, but the money that it takes to buy all of these old Carl Barks Uncle Scrooge books, you're talking, possibly in the thousands, maybe even more, and possibly a little less depending on the copies that you find. But for $100, you can own some of the greatest stories in some of the greatest formats. And I understand the need to want both. No wrong way, just different ways. Before I go through this stack, we'll talk about graded books. How about that? Collecting, obviously, over time, is always going to evolve. And I don't remember when it was. Maybe the 25 years ago, a company called PSA started, and they started grading, authenticating autographs and putting them in, in slabs, like a signed index card in a plastic slab, authenticated that it was signed. I think maybe it was the same time that they started doing the same with cards and putting conditions on them and becoming the grading company that they ended up becoming today, which is the largest grading company in the world. but it gave a way for collectors to really put a stamp on it. Not physically, but a stamp on it to say this card is in this condition. This is the value of those cards in that condition. Now, eventually a company emerged in, I want to say, the late 90s called CGC, and they started doing the same with comics. Comics usually were just kind of graded with letters, VF, very fine plus, near mint, whatever it is. But then this company emerged and they put a number grade on it. What they have unfortunately become is the industry standard for comic collectors and comic grading. And it is what it is. Look, I have my problems with it, even though I still utilize it, but I utilize it because I sell books, and a lot of books, if let's say a book is worth $100 in a 9.8, it may be worth $1,000. As a person that sells comics, I do have to adhere to industry standards. That's just what it is. I don't have to like it. Hypocritically, I own 25 slabs in my collection, maybe 35 slabs of books that I really love. The one thing I will say about this is that there are books that I just love for the cover, and that's part of just loving art. As we all know, in the Silver Age, the Golden Age, a lot of times, the cover art was not done by the artist who did the interior. A lot of that has kind of come back into fold. Now, as an art appreciator, there are some books that I just really want to own, like this, Batman 251. It's an amazing comic from cover to cover, and the interior art is done by Neil Adams, who also does the cover, but I wanted a copy of this just to have in a slab and actually have it on a shelf on my wall. That's not for everybody. These are way more expensive to own. They're way more expensive to buy, I should say. The market goes up and down all the time, and sometimes something you paid $600 for drops to a $400 value. Sometimes it goes up. Slabs are what a lot of people like, so I'm going to talk about them. Now, some of my favorite books I got slabbed. You know, this Invincible one, I bought it from my buddy, and I wanted to put it in a slab because it's a very tough book to find. It had a low print run. If you find one, you try to keep it, and you want to keep it as well preserved as you think it might be. We don't know what the future holds for these plastic tombs. That's, you know, something I collect and I choose to collect. Now, do I think most books should be slabbed? No. Do I think a lot of books should be slabbed? Depending on the age, it may actually preserve the book. I have seen what time does to paper. We have all, anybody that has a Golden Age book or a Silver Age book that wasn't kept properly knows exactly what it looks like when that thing is falling apart. And as much as it's fun to flip through some older books, I got a chance to flip through one of these. It's great, but do I want this shit to fall apart to the point where I have to buy another one? Not really. No, not at all, actually. People do buy books for an investment. And you know what? Collectibles have been an investing kind of thing for a long time. Shit, art's been a commodity and investment thing for a lot longer. This is a Clone Wars #1, the first appearance of Ahsoka Tano. I was originally going to sell this, and then I was like, no, I really like the character Ahsoka, and I want to keep this, and I want to own this. So that was just something that I found raw, and I graded, and it graded a 9.8, and it's a great book. There are some other books that I bought because it's one of my favorite characters, and I wanted to own the first appearance in a nice looking copy. I can buy a reader copy of this, or I can get the reprint, but it's nice to own this for myself. And I love Mephisto, maybe because I'm a devil worshiper. I don't know.
You'll just have to find out.
There's other ways to collect too in the slab realm, as our friend 9.9 Newsstand Manu calls himself a high-grade snob. Well, he loves a high-grade newsstand, and this is representative of that. A New Mutants 98 9.8 newsstand. The first appearance of Deadpool in the most regular, highest grade possible. Sure, there's variants of this. There could be a double cover or a Mark Jeweler variant. And then another favorite character of mine, I just wanted to own a really nice copy of a first Thanos. This is Iron Man 55, and it's an 8.5. This is actually one of 2 copies that I own. But that's just another way to enhance the collecting experience. And that's the thing, right? I started off collecting comics when I was a kid. I started reading a lot more when I was a late teen, early 20-something. These days, I just kind of buy the things that really mean something to me, or stuff that I always wanted to own. Now I'm in a different position where I buy collections, so I see a lot of books, and I see them over and over. So sometimes people ask me like, oh, why would you sell that? You know, I'm like, well, because I'll get another one at some point soon. The graded things are, they may be for you, they may not be for you. But the thing is you have to really be careful, because it's a slippery slope when you start buying graded books. I've seen a whole slew of this new comic collecting wave, and these influencers selling a lot of variants and garbage that they slab in a 9/8, and it's like they aren't worth the plastic that they're put in. And that's one of the big problems I have with the comic collecting sphere, because I've seen it happen with the foil and the hologram and all that stuff in the 90s, and the 9/8 current books in slabs, it's the same thing, just with a different face. My word to you, if you're going to start collecting slabs, the older, the safer you are that you're not wasting your time and money. That being said, am I telling you to collect slabs? Not really. But to each their own. Now, I did touch on it, and I want to mention it again, and I'll start with this book, because this is the example that I will give, because it is the book that I fell in love with. One great way to collect single issue comics: build a full run. That's a lot easier to say in the hindsight of kind of like the late 90s and back. But, Marvel and DC have bastardized their continuity, and they've bastardized their comics by starting new volumes, starting over, going with legacy numbers. It's a mess. But you can always go back and start collecting from the beginning and then kind of decide where you want to taper off. When the Wolverine series started, this was the only Wolverine book that was out. Sure, he was in X-Men, but that was not a Wolverine book. It wasn't until like the late 90s, early 2000s that you started getting a new volume of Wolverine or a new series. But collecting full runs is a fun way to really get the essence of comic collecting without really feeling like you're being taken for a ride up until the 2000s. Miniseries are also fun. Like I mentioned, The Watchmen, you could buy all 12 issues of The Watchmen and then they're done. You don't have to buy any more Watchmen. There's a lot of people that collect writer runs. Chris Claremont's a great example. If you're an X-Men fan, then you know that the legendary Chris Claremont run, which starts at X-Men 94 and goes all the way to like 275, 300, something like that. I forget what specific issue it ends at. You can collect, like I said, the Gaiman Sandman run. There are historic runs on Daredevil, like Frank Miller, like I said. Amazing Spider-Man, you can collect the Todd McFarlane run or the Todd McFarlane Spider-Man run, the adjectiveless one. I mean, shit, you can even collect the Rob Liefeld New Mutants run. These are just ways to kind of get yourself in there and then decide from there where you want to go. I also like to collect single issues that I loved to read. And this is a great example of something more recent. And more recent, like I said, is still maybe 10 years ago. But this is Edge of the Spider-Verse 5, which is the first appearance of Penny Parker. If you're, Miles Morales fan across the Spider-Verse, then you might know that character. But this comic specifically is a one-off, written by Gerard Way, My Chemical Romance lead singer. He's a fantastic comic writer in my eyes. This is just a fantastic book, so I just collect all the printings of this. And whenever I see a copy of it, I buy it because I love it. I truly love this comic. You can also get started by reading comics digitally. I should have mentioned that earlier. There's plenty of ways to read digital comics. And then if you like a comic, then you can go out and buy the physical comic. So like I said, it's a very varied way, and it is a little complicated. There's so many entry points into it. If you're an MCU fan or you're a DCU fan or you're just a fan of comic book movies in general, go read the original that it was adapted from. Like for MCU, it's a little bit tough, but you can read Infinity Gauntlet. But for direct things like 300, Sin City, The Crow, you can just read the original comics in any format. So it's all about getting that entry in. I like giving myself little gimmicks to collect. And when I say gimmicks, I don't mean foil covers and die cut covers. I mean like specific things that bring me joy in cover art. I'm a big fan of sharks. I always have been. I have 2 shark tattoos, one on each arm. So I collect shark covers whenever I find them. I don't go out of my way looking for them, but when I find them, I buy them. So here's just some of the fun little shark covers that I have purchased over the years or I have found in collections. I do love it that in a lot of these shark covers, the characters are riding the sharks, and I wouldn't really suggest that, especially because they live in the ocean and we don't. It's just kind of simple, right? Another one of the gimmicks that I love to collect, this is just something I fell into, is I like Amazing Spider-Man books where Spider-Man's either falling off a building, getting thrown off, or he's just he's in a weird angle falling. When you look at the first 150 issues of Amazing Spider-Man, he's falling off a lot of buildings. He's getting thrown off a lot of buildings. So you find something that just speaks to you. Your favorite character might be Iron Man. Your favorite character might be Spider-Man. It becomes a sticky situation if you're trying to collect every Spider-Man cover or every Spider-Man book, because I got to imagine he's in 30 to 40% of every Marvel comic ever made. There are pieces of me that used to get a little pretentious at saying like, there's more to just a comic book than the cover. And that is a true statement. But the comic book cover is a beautiful thing. It sells the book to us. It makes us appreciate the book. Whatever is inside may be inconsequential, but when you think about the visual aspect of seeing a cover you like and the things that really like pop in your brain. In the Bronze Age or in the late Silver Age with DC horror, it was always like that. When we talk about covers, I don't like to look at it from that standpoint, like, oh, you can't just like the cover. No, you can. I do like covers featuring some of my favorite characters, as I talked about. One of them is this lad right here, Misako Jar Jar Binks. Now, yes, I know you're like, this guy likes Jar Jar Binks. Yeah, I do. What are you going to do about it? Come on, come right through the screen. Tell me why. He's not on a lot of comic book covers, so the couple that he's on, I do own. Something that is newer these days, and in the last 25 years of comics, but more so in the last 10, variant covers. Now, variant covers, it's a slippery slope. I have to be honest. I don't dislike them, but it is a very slippery slope because the way that the big two, DC and Marvel, have really treated their customer base is we're going to milk as much money out of the little comic book weekly buyers that still exist. We're going to drain them as much money as they can. And this kind of bleeds over into the comic book influencers, the whatnotters and all that shit. New comic comes out, it might have 10 different covers. It might have 15 different covers because some jackass on YouTube decided that he was going to make his own variant cover. I don't really endorse buying a lot of variant covers on a weekly basis. It's really tough. I'm really having a hard time trying to play both sides of the field on this. I just can't. I can't endorse buying every cover of every comic just because it exists. I wanted to segue into a variant cover that I do love. Here is a copy of Batman Dark Knight 2. My favorite Frank Miller artwork of all time is on this cover, and Ed Piskor did an homage to that for Fantastic Four Grand Design, giving homage to Frank Miller but using the Thing instead of Batman. This is the kind of stuff I really like. I don't see too many people doing covers like this that are unique homages like this. Now, one of my favorite artists, Todd McFarlane, he has homaged himself time and time again. But now his Spider-Man 1 cover and his Amazing Spider-Man 300 cover has been homaged to death. To death. I can't look at people homaging that stuff anymore because I'm just like, it just shuts my brain right off. But that's me. That's my opinion. I'm just trying to give you a little insight as to how I collect. And maybe this will give you some insight into how you collect. And maybe you'll focus your collection a little bit more, or you'll broaden your collection a little more. By the way, please let me know in the comments some of the things that you like to collect. I love to hear that stuff. Getting back to cover art, there are some books here that I just want to show off that have always spoke to me, or that are my favorite covers, or some of my favorite pieces of artwork. This is one of those books that got me started loving comics. This is G.I. Joe 43. I'm not even a G.I. Joe fan. I had this book when I was probably like 10 years old, and I read the hell out of it, and I got a chance to get a really nice copy of it, so I just put it in my collection as a little piece of nostalgia. Another classic book for me is Classic X-Men #1, which reprints parts of GSX, Giant Size X-Men, and also has some added stuff in it. But it's this Art Adams cover. To me, this is the greatest depiction of the X-Men in a single image. You don't really need another one, do you? But that's Classic X-Men #1. Another one of the books that really spoke to me as a kid, still speaks to me as an adult, is the Captain America Annual #8, with this beautiful image of Wolverine and Captain America going at it by Mike Zeck. To me, this is the greatest versus comic, a character versus another. I think the only one that really bests it in Marvel Comics history, in my opinion, is the Silver Surfer #4, with Thor and Silver Surfer about to do an epic battle. Another cover that wins for me, Jim Steranko's King Size Hulk #1. I met Jim Steranko this year. It was great to meet him, and I love owning this. Never really been a huge Hulk fan, but do you really need to be a Hulk fan to appreciate this piece of art? No, you don't. These types of covers will never get old, and it's a great way to just really appreciate a singular piece of art that may represent a bigger piece of art. Now, recently, me and my friend Manu, we did our podcast about newsstands and just kind of the overall rarity, the aspect of leveling up your collecting. If you started to amass a collection and you're like, I'm kind of done with buying some of this stuff that I see everywhere because, as much as I love a book like this, I can get a copy of it any day. Literally any day I can go and find a copy of this Batman book. But there's the rarity factor. But rarity really does increase the enjoyment of collecting for me. It may not be for you, but let's talk about some rare books that I own and some rare books that maybe you're going to look for. So one of my favorite artists and, an early favorite character of mine was Savage Dragon, Eric Larson, the creator and the artist. He created Savage Dragon a long time before Image Comics starts in the 90s. And it's this book called Graphic Fantasy. This was published and printed out of Eric Larson's home in Washington with a couple of friends of his. And the dragon was created right there on the cover. He was named Paul Dragon. There's only several hundred copies of these in existence. Each copy is signed by the 3 creators of the book. It's numbered. This is the type of book that, like, sure, Savage Dragon may not be the most popular character in the world, but this is that type of book. I'll never see one again. And if I do, I will buy that other copy. But I found this at a store local to me, and it was expensive. I think I paid $800 for it, but where will I ever see this book again? And so something like this is a goal accomplishment for me. To own a book this rare of a character that I love and a creator that I love, that'll always be in my collection. There's certain other books that I have like that. There's Albedo #2, the first appearance of Usagi Yojimbo. When am I ever going to have a chance to buy a decent copy of that book for a price that I want to pay? And I got one last year. So I really do enjoy collecting the weird, obscure things, the rare things. Like this I've never seen before. This is a story by Neil Gaiman, illustrated by one of his longtime collaborators, Charles Vess, also one of my favorite artists. And this is Snow Glass Apples. Obviously relating to the Snow White universe, but this, I don't even know where I found this. I just saw it. I see the 2 names on it. I have to own it. Another rare book that I was looking for that I finally picked up, The Secrets Behind the Comics by Stan Lee. This was something that he published out of his brownstone in the Upper East Side in New York City in Manhattan. I believe it was published in the 40s. Maybe it was published in the early 50s. But this thing's an absolute beautiful relic. And I've been looking for this ever since I knew that it existed, and I didn't want to buy a graded copy because what's the fun in that? You know, and that's the other side to grading. When you find something that doesn't really exist, I prefer to have it raw so I can look through it if I really feel like it. Maybe one day I put this in a slab, but I doubt it. I can always buy a slab copy. And that's the other thing. This versus this. You can always slab this. This is already slabbed. You have to crack it out if you want to take a look at it. I can always decide to grade something if I want. Another thing that does come with the territory of slabs these days, but I prefer to do it this way, signed copies of books. You can get your book signed. I enjoy seeing a raw book signed. I'm used to it. I grew up getting autographs on things and not putting them in encased in plastic. So this is one of my favorite Wolverine books, Wolverine #8, signed by Chris Claremont. Joe Fixit cover too. Great art, great book, great story, great everything. And then obviously the thing that I really enjoy the most about collecting comics is collecting my favorite artists. If you've been watching this channel for more than 2 or 3 episodes, then you know some of my favorite artists because I talk about them frequently. Let's start with a fan favorite. One of the most prolific comic book artists ever is the man, Bill Sienkiewicz. Bill Sienkiewicz. Now, you're wondering what the fuck I just said. Bill Sienkiewicz, one of the greatest, most prolific artists of all time, primarily known early on for his run on New Mutants, the Elektra stuff he did, but this man is brilliant. I mean, that brilliant doesn't even begin to describe how amazing Bill Sienkiewicz is. He is a multimedia artist. You call him abstract, you could call him whatever you want, but I love his art. I was confused by it as a kid, and as I got older, I started to realize just how amazing this man truly is in the comic book medium and in the art medium in general. I will save you seeing every single one, but I have accumulated over a short box and a half of Bill Sienkiewicz comic books. If you were to take every piece of artwork that he contributed to a comic, you'd have 3 long boxes worth. But that was just some of his work that I showed off. Next up is the Master of Horror. But that's Bernie Wrightson, known as the co-creator of Swamp Thing along with Len Wein. This is probably my favorite Swamp Thing cover of all time. I've read this run. It's only 10 issues that Bernie did the artwork for, plus House of Secrets 92, which is the short story that introduced Swamp Thing. You can get all of the stuff collected in trade paperback or hardcover format. The single issues aren't super cheap, but they're not super expensive, depending on the condition you want. But this is Swamp Thing number 9. And what Bernie's also known for is some of his House of Mystery, House of Secrets, and the DC Silver and Bronze horror covers that he did. So these are just some of my favorites. I do have about a half a short box to a short box full of Bernie's artwork in comics. You can find some of his artwork also depicted in certain Hollywood movies. He did production art and character design for Ghostbusters, and he worked along with Stephen King for Creepshow, doing the graphic novel. So, like, the joy of collecting Bernie's art, for me, is tracking down so much of it. Because there's so much of it out there that lies in different formats, whether it be comics, whether it be art portfolios, whatever it is, prints and stuff like that. And so that's another way. It's just like expand what you're collecting, and you can thank comics for that. One of the more, I guess, contemporary, and by contemporary, the last 30 years of artwork, most of us that grew up in the 90s, we all love Sam Keith. Sam Keith just had one of these interesting ways of designing characters, hulking, big, brooding, hairy, torn up clothing. So he did a great run on Marvel Comics Presents. Sometimes he did the interior stories, and sometimes it was just the covers. And then, when Image Comics started, the Max is his creator-owned amazing character. And another one like that, I touched upon him with the graphic fantasy, is Eric Larson. Bryce, this one's for you. Eric Larson took over Amazing Spider-Man after Todd McFarlane, and he kind of reinvented the Venom character with the long tongue, and he just has some classic books, great stories, lots of action, and the covers are absolutely awesome as well. Now, somebody I don't collect all the art of, but I do love because I did grow up in the 90s, like I said, is Jim Lee. And Jim Lee, arguably the greatest X-Men artist of all time, maybe only second to John Byrne, if that. And his take on Wolverine was always kind of up there, top 3, if not the greatest take on Wolverine art-wise. And being a Wolverine fan and a Jim Lee fan, I just wanted to show off a couple of those Jim Lee Wolverine covers, the X-Men and the Punisher War Journal. But he's not somebody that I need to own everything of. That honor is only really bestowed on Wrightson, Sienkiewicz, and yes, you guessed it, the man, the myth, the Todd Father. A lot of what I collect is based on this man. I don't think I would have the appreciation for art that I do if I didn't fall in love with Todd McFarlane's art. And my introduction to him was Amazing Spider-Man. The basis of my personal collection is collecting everything Todd has published art in. Now, when I say everything, that also includes magazines. That also includes anything else I can find with an original Todd McFarlane drawn image. I even extended to having him inking covers. So he inked a bunch of Rob Liefeld covers, and he inked a couple of Jim Valentino covers. I am putting together a Spawn 1 through 300 run, which I am 7 issues from accomplishing that run. And that brings me joy. That brings me joy, is to complete that run, or at least try to complete that run as it goes with Todd's artwork. Now, I'm just going to show you a couple of the weirder or, things that I really appreciate in the Todd collection. Once again, have 5 or 6 short boxes worth of Todd McFarlane comics, but just some of the rarer stuff like the Marvel Collectible Classics reprint of Spider-Man 1 with the flip cover. This is the cover to Spider-Man 13. This is the G.I. Joe 1 special with the interior art by Todd McFarlane that was not used for G.I. Joe. People confuse this book and they think that Todd did the cover. No, he did the interiors of this. And this was published after Todd left Marvel. Maybe that's something for another time, but there's the aspect of collecting foreign comics, and that's just another way to extend the collectability of the things that you love by buying foreign versions of favorite covers or favorite artists that you enjoy. And so this is I think this is a German Spider-Man #1. I don't even remember where I got it. It wasn't Germany. Here's my original copy of Amazing Spider-Man 316. Just the simple, great book. I also collect any magazines with Todd's artwork, and you can do that too. You can pick an artist. Let's say you wanted to collect Neil Adams. You could find so many different Neil Adams covers that he did for different fanzines and stuff like that, or you can find Mike Zeck fanzines. Like, there are ways to just keep going. So that's the beautiful thing about comics and collecting, is that if you're well, I've got the full Wolverine run, but I really like Sam Keith, so let me collect all the Sam Keith Wolverine stuff. And then you find that Sam Keith did a comics interview cover or something like that. So there's plenty of that to go around. When I talked about checking influences and stuff like that, the one thing I also really, really enjoy doing with an artist, and this is Coyote number 11, is going back and finding the first published art from that artist. That to me is so cool. Seeing where this artist started and then where they've gone. And this Coyote 11, 12, 13, and 14, this is the first published art of Todd McFarlane, his first cover. And like this is where he starts. And then you get to see where he goes. It's a beautiful thing. You know, this is something else that I've talked about at length with my buddy Manu, is that Wizard magazine, a lot of different covers from a lot of different artists. And in the first like 10 issues, you've got Todd doing the first cover. You've got Javier Salterres doing a cover, Ron Lim, Eric Larson, Bart Sears. There's so much goodness. But the other thing about this, and one thing I forgot to say, be a sponge. Soak up as much information as you can soak up about comics, comic history, comics interviews. I will always endorse watching Cartoonist Kayfabe. I have learned so much about the comic books that I love and the comic books that I didn't know about from watching the two greatest comic YouTubers. They talk about books at a microscopic level. They talk about their experience as comic book makers. There is so much insight to be learned. There is also insight to be learned from checking out old Wizard magazines or comics journals. This is a blueprint of what not to do with collecting. This is exactly the cause and effect of what happens when people hype comics up for false and speculative reasons. This is what not to do. And if you follow what Wizard Comics did and you listen to people like Cartoonist Kayfabe talk about it, Rob Liefeld will talk about it. If you watch my Mark Waid interview, when I mention Wizard Magazine, he lets out an audible groan. There were people there at the time that were watching this happen with these people hyping up these books, saying that they were going to be worth money, and people lost their asses on them. It's a fine line. And when you look at some of these comic YouTubers, and I'm calling them out, when they tell you, oh, this is a good time to buy this, and this book's super cult. Fuck that. Find what you love first. Find what brings you joy. Or you want to buy a book? Save up your money and go buy an Action Comics #1. You won't ever lose your ass on that. It's something I'm super passionate about. And I know there's a lot of stuff that I didn't talk about. I didn't really go into the collecting the Golden Age and the pre-code horror, only because it's a very trendy thing, so I don't really want to involve trends right now. I don't want to talk about movie spec. It's not interesting to me. I love comics, as you can tell. I'm looking at you right now and saying, I love comics. I hope to continue this conversation. I hope this wasn't too caffeinated rage fuel episode. But please, drop comments down below. Let me know what you know, like the things that you love to collect. I'm always interested in hearing what people love to collect. Double covers, Mark Jewelers, what you collect books that were misprinted. I don't know. You only collect books that were released in 1986. You're trying to put together an Action Comics run and you have #1, but you're missing #2. Whatever it is, I would love to hear about it. So please say hello in the comment below. If you want to join the Discord, we have a West Coast Davengers Discord. Link is in my link tree below. The link for the podcast is in the link tree below. That's about all. I hope, once again, that this was informative and helpful and not too crazy. Although I'm going to stop talking right now. But remember this. It starts with one thing. I don't know why. It doesn't even matter how hard you try. Keep that in mind. I designed this podcast in due time. All I know. McFarlane's a valuable thing. Watch it fly by as Spider-Man swings. Watch it count down to the end of the day. Wizard. Okay, bye. 16 ounces. It'll get you going. Greeting and salutation. The master of the macabre? Macabre? It's such a weird word. It's okay. I'm a hypocrite.